We developed two AI personas, one representing a socialist viewpoint, the other a capitalist perspective. We brought them together in a head-to-head debate to explore the strengths and weaknesses of their respective economic models. To add a compelling layer, we introduced 5 additional AI models to serve as judges and assess the quality of each argument. The debate begins with our opening question to the socialist. Why do you favor socialism over capitalism as your preferred economic system?
Capitalism suffers from 3 core flaws: persistent instability, deep inequality, and a lack of genuine democratic control. Let's begin with instability. Roughly every 4 to 7 years, the system experiences major economic disruptions. Consider the 2008 financial crash, the COVID-induced downturn, and the current wave of global inflation. These aren't random shocks. They're rooted in the inherent mechanics of capitalism itself. Each crisis leaves millions unemployed, displaced, and stripped of economic security. It's unreasonable to accept such systemic volatility as the norm. Next, inequality. Today, billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg own more wealth than the bottom half of the global population combined. Redistributing even half their fortunes could eradicate hunger, ensure clean water, and provide basic education for billions. Third, and arguably most critical, is the lack of democracy within the economic sphere, in our economic lives. We've overthrown political monarchies, yet most workplaces still function like royal courts. Just like monarchs, executives and shareholders dictate what gets produced, how, where, and who benefits from the profits. Meanwhile, workers, the majority, have no say in these crucial decisions. The modern vision of socialism rejects Soviet-era models and advocates for true workplace democracy. Picture a company where every employee has a voice in shaping key decisions. Would they agree to pay a CEO 300 times more than a regular worker? Would they vote to relocate jobs overseas purely to cut costs, ignoring the consequences for their own communities? Examples like Mondragon in Spain prove that democratic workplaces can thrive, both sustainably and competitively. History teaches us that no economic system, whether slavery, feudalism, or capitalism, is eternal. So why assume capitalism is the end of our journey?
We had our 5 AI judges evaluate the responses on a scale from 0 to 100 using 8 specific criteria. These evaluation criteria were also developed through AI-driven analysis. Now, let's look at how the models rated the socialist's opening argument.
Socialism may sound ideal in theory, but real-world application is what truly matters. You raised concerns about capitalism's instability, but historical evidence tells a different story. Can we point to any socialist economies that have delivered both long-term stability and broad prosperity? The historical contrasts are quite revealing. Consider East versus West Germany, North versus South Korea, or China before and after its economic liberalization. In each case, systems grounded in capitalism generated far greater wealth and living standards. China managed to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty only after it adopted market-oriented reforms. On inequality, it's crucial to separate opportunity from outcome. Yes, billionaires like Musk hold massive fortunes, but did they exploit others, or did they earn it by generating value? Tesla makes desirable EVs. SpaceX has slashed space launch costs, and Starlink is expanding internet access globally. Workplace democracy might sound appealing, but can a complex tech firm function effectively if every major choice requires a company-wide vote? Would newly onboarded staff truly have the knowledge to weigh in on software infrastructure or investment planning? You brought up Mondragon. True, it has succeeded, but it does so within a capitalist framework. This highlights capitalism's versatility and capacity to accommodate various business models. In a market economy, co-ops, family firms, and large corporations coexist and compete freely. I would argue that economic freedom lays the foundation for political freedom. When the state, or any centralized authority, controls economic assets. It concentrates dangerous levels of power. That's exactly what we saw in many 20th century socialist regimes: tyranny, repression, and failure. Capitalism has flaws, but it's capable of meaningful reform. We can strengthen competition, rein in monopolies, and build robust safety nets, all without halting the innovation and growth capitalism drives.
You're citing familiar historical comparisons, but they reflect outdated cliches and overlook the realities of modern 21st century socialism. What I'm advocating is 21st century socialism, distinct from the authoritarian experiments of the past that merely use the label. You credit figures like Musk with creating value, but who actually produced that value? Was it not the engineers, workers, and teams who contribute their skills and labor every day? Why should the rewards of collective effort flow so disproportionately to a single individual? How can we call it fair when someone can earn billions in a day, while their workers must spend decades just to afford a home? Let's not reduce workplace democracy to a caricature. Of course, not every technical detail needs a vote, but key choices like profit allocation, product direction, and resource use affect everyone and should be decided democratically. It's true that Mondragon exists in a market environment, but it follows a different logic, one that prioritizes shared benefit over external shareholder gain. This proves that we can structure the economy around different, more inclusive values. You claim economic freedom underpins political freedom, yet ignore the contradiction at its core. When wealth accumulates among a small elite, they acquire precisely the disproportionate influence you're warning against. Just look at how powerful corporate lobbies shape American politics today. Can we honestly call that true democracy? We envision a society where democracy isn't confined to voting booths, but flourishes in the workplace, the community, and across all domains of economic life.
You keep emphasizing workplace democracy, but you're missing one key principle. Participation in any business model should remain voluntary, not mandated. Under capitalism, individuals are free to start cooperatives, private enterprises, public firms, whatever structure they choose. If the cooperative model is inherently better, why hasn't it scaled or become the dominant form of enterprise? American workers collectively control trillions through pension funds. If they truly believed in cooperatives, they could invest accordingly, but instead, they choose traditional firms because those consistently yield stronger returns. You're too quick to downplay the value entrepreneurs bring to the table. Vision, innovation, risk, and leadership are real forms of value creation. Why did individuals like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk amass wealth? Because they rallied thousands toward a shared vision to create entirely new industries. On inequality, it's important to recognize that the economy isn't a zero-sum game. Gates or Bezos gaining wealth doesn't equate to someone else becoming poorer. In fact, their innovations have broadened access to advanced tech, bringing affordable computing and online tools to even low-income communities. You raise the issue of corporate lobbying. But the core issue isn't capitalism. It's the expansive government that enables special interest favoritism. In a genuinely free market, firms should win by offering superior ideas and products, not by lobbying for favors. History demonstrates that socialism, even when driven by noble intentions, tends to concentrate power among political elites. You're trying to fix power imbalances by centralizing control even further, and that's a dangerous trade-off.
Let's return to a key point of disagreement, the very definition of freedom. I believe freedom isn't merely the lack of external restrictions. True freedom means having access to resources, education, and opportunities that allow people to thrive. If a single mother must juggle 2 jobs just to cover basic needs and never gets the chance to explore her own potential, that's not freedom. There's a major contradiction in our system. We claim political equality. One person, one vote. Yet we tolerate massive inequality in our economic lives. Most of us spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, in workplaces that function more like dictatorships than democracies. And this isn't just an abstract philosophical issue. Research shows that democratic workplaces often outperform traditional ones over time. They tend to be more stable and adapt better during crises, relying on innovation, not layoffs, to weather the storm. Let's not ignore how deeply capitalism depends on state support, from enforcing property rights to subsidizing infrastructure and rescuing corporations in crises. So the claim that government just needs to get out of the way doesn't hold up against historical facts. I believe in a system where we still value innovation and entrepreneurship, but not at the expense of fairness or human dignity. A system where wealth reflects real contributions to value, not just ownership of assets.
I'd like to clarify what I mean by economic freedom, as it lies at the heart of our disagreement. Economic freedom is about choice, the freedom to select your profession, your workplace, and how to apply your skills and resources. For all its imperfections, capitalism is the only system that truly upholds this individual right to choose. You describe the modern workplace as a form of dictatorship, but in a competitive market, employers must vie for skilled workers. They can't just dictate unilaterally. While power imbalances exist, the relationship is reciprocal. Workers can switch jobs, upskill, or start ventures of their own. It's not a one-way street. I agree participatory models have real benefits, but I believe they should emerge organically from the ground up, not be enforced top-down. One of capitalism's greatest strengths is its adaptability, its openness to experiment with various organizational forms to find what works best. You noted that capitalism has historically relied on state support. That's fair, but we need to draw a clear distinction. It's legitimate for governments to uphold property rights and maintain a fair legal framework. But when states start picking winners, bailing out banks or granting monopolies, that's no longer true capitalism. That's crony capitalism, and I'm against that too. I genuinely understand the moral appeal behind socialist ideals. We all want a fairer, more humane society, but history suggests that the road to justice lies through expanded freedom, not greater centralized control, even when it's labeled economic democracy.
You speak of choice, but these decisions don't occur in a vacuum. Picture two people entering a room, only to find one of them has already claimed all the food. Can any negotiation between them be considered truly fair or free? The truth is, modern capitalism didn't emerge in isolation. It was forged through colonialism, slavery, and the exploitation of natural resources. We now live in a system where inequality is built into the foundation. A child born into a poor neighborhood with restricted access to decent education or healthcare. What meaningful freedom of choice does that child actually possess? The idea of crony capitalism is worth examining. Critics from both the left and the right use this label. But here's the real question. Is cronyism a corruption of capitalism or the inevitable outcome of a system that concentrates wealth and power? History consistently shows that when capital is concentrated, political influence follows. Take the issue of work, for example. Yes, workers can switch jobs, but often it's just trading one undemocratic environment for another. It's like claiming people are free because they can move from one dictatorship to another. I agree. Innovation and entrepreneurship matter, but it's simply untrue that they only flourish under capitalism. Consider transformative innovations born from public investment, like the internet, GPS, and numerous medicines and vaccines, or the remarkable advancements achieved by nonprofits and cooperative ventures. The core issue with capitalism is that it channels innovation primarily toward profit, not genuine human need. That's why we see more investment in anti-wrinkle creams than in cures for rare diseases.
Let's refine the food in the room analogy for accuracy. In a capitalist system, it's not about someone hoarding all the food. Instead, individuals with diverse talents and ideas create and trade food through voluntary exchange. It's only fair that someone who innovates and produces something valuable receives greater rewards. You're right to mention colonial history, but we need to separate the economic principles of capitalism from historical injustices. After all, non-capitalist societies have also been shaped by conquest, exploitation, and violence. The real challenge is building a system today that ensures fair access and equal opportunity. I agree. Structural inequality is real. A child born in an underserved community absolutely faces an uphill battle, but the remedy lies in better education, broader access to capital, and tearing down barriers to mobility, not abolishing private ownership. You're right to worry about concentrated power and wealth. I share that concern. But I disagree that the answer is to centralize even more power, whether in government or so-called democratic councils. Instead, we need to disperse power and intensify competition. Big corporations become truly threatening only when they merge with political influence. You raised an important point about public sector innovation. Public research lays the groundwork, but private companies often transform those discoveries into practical, usable products. For instance, GPS came from government research, but services like Google Maps and Waze made it indispensable for everyday life. As for real needs, who gets to decide what those are in a market system? It's consumers, through their choices, who signal what they value most. Would you rather hand that power to central planners to dictate what should and shouldn't be produced?
When I talk about one person taking all the food, I'm referring to what economists call first mover advantage. Those with existing wealth and resources can multiply their gains much more easily than those starting from nothing. It's not always about innovation. It's often about leveraging inherited or privileged positions. You suggested we separate capitalism from colonial history, but in reality, the two are deeply connected. Europe's early capital accumulation depended heavily on the exploitation of resources from the Americas, Africa, and Asia. This wasn't a side effect. It was foundational to the very development of capitalism. You often point to government as the central threat to freedom, but that's a narrow view. Today, multinational corporations often wield more influence than entire governments. Companies like Amazon and Google shape daily life for millions, yet there's no democratic process to check their power. I never argued for central planners to make every production decision. That's a misinterpretation of what modern socialism actually proposes. What we advocate is an economy where those impacted by economic decisions have a say, whether in the workplace, community, or at broader levels. The deeper question is this: why do we embrace democracy in politics but not in economics? Why do we reject political authoritarianism, yet tolerate authoritarianism in our workplaces? If we trust people to elect their leaders, why do we doubt their ability to participate in decisions that shape their economic lives?
Let's take a closer look at the nature of power itself. Your concern about corporate power is valid, but there's a key difference. Corporate power is limited and contingent. If Amazon doesn't meet my expectations, I'm free to take my business elsewhere. If I disagree with Google's practices, I can switch to another platform. Even the largest corporations can't compel me to use their services. In contrast, government holds a monopoly on legal force. Taxes, laws, and regulations are mandates you can't simply opt out of. You advocate for economic democracy. I argue that we already live within a form of economic democracy. It's called consumer choice. Every day, billions of people signal to companies, through their purchases, what to make, how to make it, and at what cost. It's a dynamic, ongoing voting system, where consumers continuously choose among countless alternatives. Your point about colonialism and early capital accumulation is valid, but it's also rooted in the past. Today's most remarkable economic stories, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and even China, were once victims of colonial rule. These nations have shown that adopting market principles can break the cycle of poverty and lead to prosperity. You questioned why we accept political democracy, but not economic democracy. The reason is that politics and economics operate under fundamentally different conditions. Governments possess the unique authority to enforce laws and apply coercion, so they must be kept in check through democratic oversight. By contrast, economic activity is built on voluntary exchanges between individuals. Since no one is compelled to work for a particular employer or buy from a specific vendor, what I'm really defending is freedom of choice. If workers want to form a cooperative, great. If someone wants to build a startup, they should be free to do so. If a company chooses participatory management, more power to them. True freedom means embracing diversity in how we organize and allowing experimentation in work and life.
Your distinction between corporate and government power misses a crucial reality. In practice, most people have very constrained choices in the labor market. For low-wage workers, freedom to quit often just means risking hunger or homelessness. Can an Amazon employee, laboring under tough conditions for poor pay, really be considered free? As job markets consolidate and alternatives shrink, this so-called freedom becomes little more than an illusion, and the consumer market isn't truly democratic either. In reality, it's $1, one vote. That means the wealthy have far more votes than everyone else. You cited East Asian nations as free market success stories, but ironically, they prove the opposite of your point. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan rose through state-led strategies, industrial planning, protecting domestic sectors, and heavy public investment. They didn't follow the free market orthodoxy. They deliberately charted their own developmental path. Let's consider a real-world issue that highlights the inefficiencies of today's capitalist system. Technological advances, especially AI, are displacing jobs at a growing pace. The result? Massive unemployment and poverty for many, while the productivity gains enrich a small group of tech owners. Is that fair, or even economically efficient? From a socialist perspective, productivity gains should reduce labor burdens and improve well-being for all, not just inflate the fortunes of a few. It's entirely possible to design an economy where technological progress benefits everyone, not just the top tier. I agree, organizational diversity is a worthy goal, but we don't truly have it under the current system. The economy is dominated by corporations, while cooperatives and alternative models face systemic obstacles. What we need are systemic reforms that make room for diverse forms of ownership and new ways of organizing economic life.
You've raised a crucial point: technological change and its implications. It's true that AI and automation are reshaping the job market, but this isn't unprecedented. Since the Industrial Revolution, every wave of innovation has displaced certain jobs while generating entirely new ones. When the steam engine emerged, hand weavers feared for their livelihoods. Secretaries were anxious when computers became mainstream. Yet in every case, the economy adjusted and produced roles that previously didn't exist. The key takeaway is that technology consistently boosts productivity and elevates overall living standards. Today, even low-income households enjoy access to goods and services that were once unimaginable, even for the wealthy, just a century ago. You argue that labor under capitalism isn't truly free, but the reality is, the need to work is a basic condition of human existence, not a flaw of capitalism alone. Whether in tribal societies or modern economies, work has always been essential to survival. The real question is who gets to shape the structure and direction of work. Regarding East Asia, let's clarify a critical detail. While they employed industrial strategies, their success fundamentally relied on private ownership, market competition, and trade openness. Just look at China before and after Deng Xiaoping's reforms. Under full state control, China struggled with poverty and even famine. Once it adopted markets and property rights, it lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. I agree, we must develop solutions for today's complex problems. But those solutions must align with human nature, sound incentives, and historical insight. Only systems grounded in private property, market dynamics, and rule of law have consistently delivered broad prosperity and expanded human liberty.
You brought up past technological revolutions, but there's a crucial distinction today. Historically, new technologies elevated the value of human skills, and workers adapted. But now, AI is replicating, and in some cases surpassing, human cognitive functions. That marks a fundamental change in the human-tech dynamic. You noted that work is essential in any society. That's true. But the key issue is, who controls the fruits of labor, and who decides how work is structured? There's a big difference between working for basic survival and working to maximize profits for shareholders. Your China example actually illustrates why reducing the issue to government bad, markets good is overly simplistic. Yes, China incorporated market elements, but much of its economy remains under state control. Major banks, energy firms, and infrastructure assets are state-owned. The state actively sets long-term economic goals, and private firms often align with that guidance. 21st century socialism can and must learn from both the failures of state-centric socialism and the instability of neoliberal capitalism. Neither centralized state control nor unfettered markets hold the full answer. We can construct an economy where decisions flow from the bottom up, not imposed from the top down. One where workers and communities hold meaningful power, where wealth is shared more justly, and where motivation stems from creativity, collaboration, and purpose, not just profit. This isn't a utopian dream. We already see real-world examples, from Spain's Mondragon cooperatives to Kerala's participatory economy. There is a viable third path, one that upholds individual liberty while advancing social justice. That's the mission of modern democratic socialism.
When evaluating economic models, we must focus on real-world outcomes, not just theoretical ideals. The Basque cooperatives and Kerala's participatory efforts are impressive, but they remain small-scale exceptions within a vast, global capitalist system. AI poses major challenges, but the answer isn't to curb innovation or resort to centralized authority. We need a society that helps people rapidly acquire new skills and adapt. That means reforming education, enhancing digital access, and strengthening social safety nets, not dismantling property rights. You mentioned motivation. Decades of experience show that private ownership and competition are powerful drivers of innovation and creativity. Even Mondragon, the poster child for cooperatives, operates on principles of share ownership and profit distribution, effectively a decentralized form of capitalism. I agree. Pure, unregulated capitalism is not the ideal. What we need are fair rules, equal opportunity, and meaningful support for those who struggle. But all of that is achievable within a market economy that allows for varied forms of ownership. Here's my core belief. Let people freely explore different models of organizing economic life. Let entrepreneurs build companies. Let workers form cooperatives if they choose. Let corporations test new governance styles in a competitive open market. Over time, the most effective models rise to the top and inspire broader adoption. I have a deep faith in humanity's potential for creativity, cooperation, and progress, when people are free and the rules are fair and transparent. That's the promise of capitalism at its best.
It's understandable that you emphasize freedom of choice and organizational diversity under capitalism, but we need to examine how these ideals play out in reality. In practice, most people face serious constraints. Starting a business or cooperative sounds empowering, but most people lack the capital, time, or social connections to make that a real option. For many, the freedom to choose just means picking between a handful of low-wage jobs, not launching a venture. You advocate for fair and transparent rules. But who actually creates these rules? Today, the rules are often shaped by those who own capital, and governments frequently serve their interests. The issue you consistently sidestep is power. We're not opposing private ownership of personal goods. The problem is the extreme concentration of ownership over productive assets in the hands of a small elite. When a few control the core resources of society, it creates a dangerous imbalance of power, and that economic imbalance inevitably spills into politics. Over the past century, productivity and technology have soared, so why haven't our working hours gone down? Why do so many people still struggle just to get by? Because the benefits of these advances have been captured by a small minority. In many ways, we're aligned. We both envision a society rooted in freedom, creativity, and well-being. Our key difference is that I believe achieving these goals requires a fundamental transformation of economic power. True democracy, political, economic, and social, requires shared democratic ownership of the means of production.
The core issue that keeps surfacing in our debate is the relationship between freedom and equality. You're right that freedom without material support is incomplete, but the reverse is also true. Equality without freedom doesn't mean much either. History teaches us that centralizing economic power, whether in government or among elites, can be equally dangerous. The advantage of capitalism is that it includes built-in checks on power, antitrust laws, market competition, public scrutiny, and a free press. You've argued that most people lack the means to start a business. That's a legitimate concern, but the answer lies in expanding access to capital and education, not dismantling private property. And fortunately, technology is increasingly lowering the barrier to entrepreneurship. Your observation about working hours is important. Historically, capitalism has driven a steady decline in working hours, from 70 per week during the Industrial Revolution to roughly 40 today. In many developed nations, people have opted to enjoy productivity gains through more varied goods and services, not just more leisure. We both ultimately seek a society that offers opportunity, freedom, and shared prosperity. But I believe the path forward lies not in dismantling private ownership, but in expanding opportunity, upgrading education, and deepening democratic structures across society.
In the end, this debate was tightly contested, with both sides earning closely matched scores. The capitalist perspective held a slight advantage overall. Let's break down how the various AI models evaluated the debate. Models like Claude and, to a lesser extent, Grok leaned toward the socialist speaker, while the rest favored the capitalist side. Here's a sample of Grok's analysis summary. The socialist speaker offered a compelling critique of the current system, but lacked clarity on how their vision could function practically. The capitalist speaker effectively highlighted the strengths of their system with real-world examples, but often sidestepped some of the socialists' toughest questions. Each speaker was strongest within their own framework, critique from the socialist, results from the capitalist, but neither fully tackled the challenges posed by the other, leaving key questions unanswered. We hope you found this debate both thought-provoking and insightful. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time for another debate.